Hello guys and welcome as always to Let's Talk About It. As you may or may not be aware, I've been away for a little while, but I'm back now with a brand new video, and just like other things that come back from the dead, this video is all about zombies. So the idea of zombies can be loosely traced back to the ancient Greeks. This is because archaeologists discovered skeletons that had been weighed down by heavy rocks, with the assumption being that the ancient Greeks that buried the dead feared that they could reanimate to terrorize society. However, it is practices from the African-based religion of voodoo that provide some more well-known real-world examples of zombies, with some followers believing that zombification is caused by bokas, voodoo practitioners, who create concoctions that contain a deadly neurotoxin known as tetrodotoxin that, when administered in controlled amounts, can cause all of the symptoms of the undead. Difficulty walking, confusion, problems with breathing, and in some cases paralysis and comas from which people are accidentally buried alive to only seemingly come back to life later on. And of course, eventually, the idea of zombies went from being part of a religion to part of the big screen, because it was in 1932 that a man named Victor Halprin's directed White Zombie, a film that took the traits of Haitian voodoo and turned it into the first example of zombies immortalized on film. However, despite what we know about the undead, White Zombie features no eating of brains, nor corpses rising from their graves. That theme began in 1968 when George A. Romero released the film Night of the Living Dead, a classic that set the standard for all zombie films to follow, although, interestingly enough, the word zombie never appears in the film. But, nevertheless, the act of Romero's ghouls hunting for survivors of an undead apocalypse, as the living do all they can to escape from and or fight a rotting horde who are desperate to consume their flesh, has become the expected standard of all zombie-based entertainment that has followed in the decades since.
28 days later, World War Z, The Walking Dead, Rob Zombie, Korea, The Last Kids on Earth, Plants vs. Zombies. The Dying Light.
Being just a few examples of the horror genre's decaying grip on mankind, meaning that whatever form of entertainment you choose, you are almost guaranteed to come across a zombie at some point. But sometimes those encounters with the living dead filter into the real world, kind of. For example, in May of 2012, a Miami resident by the name of Rudy Eugene, then 31, violently assaulted a 65-year-old homeless man named Ronald Popo in a prolonged and terrifying attack that saw a naked Rudy Eugene violently and disturbingly bite, tear, claw, and rip away his victim's face until approximately 80% of it was missing. Eventually, Rudy was shot dead by a police officer named Jose Ramirez, who was left with no other choice. Miraculously, Ronald Popo survived the attack, although with life-changing injuries, and told police interviewers that when he first encountered his attacker on Miami's MacArthur Causeway, he seemed like a good guy, talking about how he didn't like the beach. But then suddenly, without provocation, he began screaming and launched into his attempt to murder the man he had just met. A similar case took place in August of 2016 when a 19-year-old Austin Haroff brutally murdered John Stevens, 59, and his wife Michelle Mishcon, 53, in a prolonged, unprovoked and terrifying attack that saw Austin repeatedly stab the couple with a switchblade. When police arrived, they found Austin chewing on the faces of the dead couple as he grunted and growled like a wild animal. In response, the police used stun guns and an attack dog on Austin, but the methods had no effect on the killer. In the end, it took strength in numbers and brute force as 3 police officers dragged the crazed teen away from his victims. In both these cases, a drug known as flakka was said to be the cause, but the toxicology reports showed that Austin Harroff had no drugs in his system and Ruby Eugene to have only trace amounts of marijuana in his, leading the theory of both attacks to be that these men were suffering from severe, dangerous, untreated mental health issues. But sometimes drugs are to blame for a zombified state. For example, in the early to mid 2000s, a drug known as crocodile became very popular in Russia due to its similarity to heroin, but a much cheaper cost. However, the money that users saved on the cost of the drug, they paid back with their health. Because one of the side effects of where this drug would be injected saw the skin turn dark and scaly, hence the name crocodile, which is Russian for crocodile. Eventually, the tissue and blood vessels in injected areas would die, causing large chunks of flesh to fall from the body, and in some cases, people's fingers and toes would also fall off, leaving addicts with open sores, decaying skin, and exposed bones, along with incoherence, shuffling, and jerking motions that have given the codeine-based narcotic its other nickname, the zombie drug. So while zombies, in their traditional sense, are something of fiction, with no reported evidence of humans rising from the grave in search of a tasty brain to eat, things get a little bit more complicated in the animal kingdom, which has its fair share of zombified creatures to talk about. For example, we firstly have zombie salmon. This is a phenomenon that happens every year when salmon head upstream to their spawning grounds. This is an extremely difficult journey that forces the salmon to use up all of its energy reserves, which eventually leads to them rotting alive as their bodies shut down. Along with these salmon's relentless, non-stop trajectory upstream that is so reminiscent of a zombie's desire and drive to consume human flesh, just to add to the zombie trait of the salmon at this time of year, males grow long, gruesome fangs to battle each other with, whilst the females grind their tails into stumps as they dig deep nests in which to lay their eggs, meaning that both sexes literally give their lives for their young. Carpenter ants are another example of creatures that turn into zombies, but for a very different reason to that of the zombie salmon. Zombification occurs in carpenter ants when they are infected with the spores of a parasitic fungus. When these spores take over the ant's mind and muscle fibers, the fungus forces the ant to climb to the highest point possible, where the ant will then die, allowing the fungus to feed on the corpse and grow from within it. At this point, the fungus, from a much higher point than it started at, is able to spread its spores far and wide to infect more carpenter ants to repeat the cruel process all over again. And so, after all this talk of real zombies, movie zombies, animal zombies, the question still needs to be asked, could a zombie apocalypse really happen? Well, technically, yes. As with carpenter ants, if a fungus was to evolve to a level that it could infect humans and have the same level of control that it does over insects and other small animals, we could easily see a world in which humans become mindless incubators for the parasitic funguses that would be living inside of us, eventually leading to humans no longer reproducing and, of course, leading to our ultimate extinction. But failing a leap in fungal evolution, we already have diseases that mirror the traits of zombies, with rabies being a prime candidate for zombifying the world. This is because rabies includes symptoms such as the stiffening of muscles for that reanimated corpse walk, painful spasms and constrictions of the throat to give that zombified rasp, and the erratic zombie-like trait of thrashing and biting, that, with rabies being spread in saliva, could see the disease spread rapidly. Also, in simple terms, there is the theory that gene editing, that is used to treat genetic diseases by altering DNA, could be taken over by bioterrorists, who could use the technology to alter everyday pathogens to target specific groups of people to turn them into zombies for insert reason here. And lastly, we have the theory that a man-made zombie apocalypse could be the result of an accident as opposed to a deliberate act, with 5G wireless network being in the firing line for this, because it is thought by some that 5G networks are responsible for damaging people's health, causing diseases that we've never seen before, with COVID-19 being a prime example of that, and altering human DNA to the point where we are turned into mindless and/or rage-filled zombies. Some believe this could be a side effect of 5G networks, whilst others believe it to be a deliberate act of governments in order to create mindless, questionless zombies to fight in future wars. But wherever the truth may be, let's just hope none of us ever have to experience a zombie apocalypse of any kind. Well guys, that brings me to the end of another video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit the like button. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button. I would really appreciate it. Thanks once again for watching, and I'll see you next time.